Ladies and gentlemen, today on the Locked On Blues podcast, it's a season review of the St. Louis Blues. Unfortunately, Friday night, the St. Louis Blues had their season end in heartbreaking fashion, losing off of basically a buzzer beater goal in the final 5 seconds. We're going to be spending this episode breaking down the game, the season, and honestly just paying tribute to what has been a spectacular season of St. Louis Blues hockey. Plus, big announcement that you guys might have seen on Twitter. We'll get into that too. Make sure you stay tuned. It's going to be an action-packed, busy episode.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm Josh Hyman, and well, as always, I'm joined by my co-host Thomas Welch, and got a big episode for you today. Before we get into any of that, though, Tommy, I am going to turn the mic over to you. I know you got something that you want to talk about briefly. I know you said you guys might have seen it on Twitter, but again, Tommy, all you before we get into this episode.
Yeah, so it's been a long ride with Josh, obviously, some of the best times of my life. But daily podcast covering Blues hockey, even in the off season, covering it 3 times a week. It's just very, very difficult to do with a full-time job and doesn't leave me a lot of free time to myself. So that being said, I think the best course of action for me personally going forward is to kind of step away from that aspect of my life and, focus on other things that I want to tend to. So this will be the last episode of Locked On Blues that I'm co-hosting. That being said, that doesn't mean I'm never going to come on again if Josh asks me to, or never going to provide input, or I'm definitely not going to stop tweeting about Blues hockey. So I'm sure you guys will still see me from time to time, just not on a daily basis on this podcast. So I appreciate everybody for the support, the continued support, for listening throughout this entire journey. 500 episodes, is just absolutely top-notch stuff. And I can't thank enough people, but especially Josh. Just being there from the very beginning, rely on, and not only on the episodes, but even when we're not recording, just talking about Blues hockey, and not only being a good co-host, but being a good friend, I think is meant the world to me. So yeah, it's been a ride, big guy.
Yeah, it's been damn, man. Going all the way back, writing for Respect the Note. What was that? 5-6 years ago? Feels long time ago. We started out as I guess you could call it coworkers on Joey Palazzola's website. Shout out Joey. Mm-hmm. The start of it all. We interviewed young page views for the first episode of the Locked On Blues podcast. We sat and talked to him for an hour.
That was
ridiculous. And now, like you said, 500 episodes. I couldn't have asked for a better person to do it alongside. That being said, though, I totally get, where you're coming from. Life's moving in different directions. We're not in the same place that we were when we started this. And, fortunately for myself, I've got a remote job. So no need to panic. You're still getting half of the Locked On Blues crew that you guys know and love. I'm going to be handling responsibilities solo for the time being. Unless anything changes, it's looking like it's going to be a solo show from here on out. That being said, Tommy's been gracious enough to handle all the audio editing and stuff like that. So these next few weeks, as I learn the ropes, bear with me. I'm going to be trying my best. I appreciate any feedback, constructive criticism you guys might have, because the audio is probably sounded a little bit differently on your end. I'm going to be using a few different tips and tricks. And also, it's like Tommy said, it's a big time commitment. So episodes might be coming out a little later, different times. It's going to be a little different for a little bit. But again, bear with us, or bear with me, I guess I should say, because I'm looking forward to it. Finally get Tommy's bad ideas out of here. It's all mine, baby. Let's go. What I've always wanted, my own podcast. Just kidding. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a transition, but I'm looking forward to it. And I love doing this. Like I said, remote job makes it a little bit easier for me to manage my time. So I'll still be here with you guys 5 days a week till the season ends, and then, like you said, 3 days a week during the off season. That being said, though, enough of this mushy stuff. We do got some hockey to talk about. And, oh, man, if this wasn't a heartbreak for our listeners enough, only probably second to the heartbreak that was felt by our listeners when they witnessed Darren Helm cue up a clap bomb from the top of the circle. Been in the league 15,000 years. Queued up a slap shot from the top of the circle as the clock is winding down. Scores past Billy Husso and just shocks the Blues, shocks me, shocks you, Tommy, shocks everybody listening at home. Painful way for the season to go out, but I will just say, pushing the Colorado Avalanche as far as they did, achieving what they achieved, being seconds away from potentially forcing a game 7. I honestly think you could chalk this season up as a success. Yes, you hate the way that it ended and you wish that things could have gone differently. You wish Binnington could have stayed healthy, this and that. But all things considered, W. This season was a W.
I think you have to. I mean, just first off on the basis that you made it out of the first round, right? Which the Blues have struggled to do since they won the Cup in 2019. Secondly, like you said, the Blues took, like if you told me at the beginning of this playoffs that the Blues would win the first round and then lose to the Avs in 6 games, I think just taking all of that into consideration without all the underlying stuff to go with it, I think I'd chalk that up as a dub just off of those regards. But you didn't have Jordan Binnington. You didn't have Torrey Krug. The defense was banged up as a whole. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of more injury notes that come out. I know I heard through the grapevine that Braden Shen has like a smorgasbord of injuries that he was dealing with. And we knew about the cracked ribs from earlier this season. So I'm sure there's a couple more to go with that. But like you said, I think it's a dub at the end of the day. That being said, there's no reason for Blues fans to feel bad about, being frustrated about the loss, because you could have pushed that game to overtime and who knows what would have happened, right? Because, the Avs already beat the Blues in overtime once that series, but, overtime, it's pretty much anybody's game, especially with the goaltending.
Beat the Avs once in overtime.
That is also true. And especially with the goaltending that we saw from Darcy Kemper throughout that series, all he had to really do was get shots on net against him, and he kind of started swimming back there, right? And I think at the end of the day, if the Blues could have done that a little bit more, they might have been more successful and gotten a different outcome in the series. But like I said, hindsight is 2020. But at the end of the day, you got to tip your cap to the Avalanche. They're a Stanley Cup favorite for a reason. And I still think to this point, maybe the Lightning might be the only team that's better stacked up to win the Stanley Cup than they are. But if they both make it there, that is going to be a slugfest between two juggernauts, to say the least.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to like mope and dope about when you're, getting knocked out by Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar and like all of these names up and down the roster. When the Blues obviously had 920 goal scorers, but a lot of them didn't show up in the series and they still forced them to 6 games. So you do what you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can't be upset, with the result. Obviously, with the way that the series went, there's always gonna be that part of me, and that I feel like that part of most Blues fans are like, man, I feel like they could have won that, and I still stand by that. I think if things go differently, the Blues could have won the series. I don't think that they deserve to win the series. In complete honesty, you look at the shot totals in a lot of those games. I think that's pretty apparent. However, that's not always how hockey works. Sometimes you win series that you don't deserve to win. Sometimes, you get magic, in the right way. The chips fall in the right way for you to win a series. And you oftentimes you got to luck into a series win to win a Stanley Cup. And I don't know if the Blues did, conquered a foe as lopsided as Colorado in their cup run, but it happens. And could have gone differently, obviously, but it definitely has got to give you hope for next season and moving forward, knowing that the Blues can stack up with the Avs and knowing that a lot of teams in the Central Division are going to be losing some talent. And the Blues are kind of set with the core that they have. Obviously, there's going to be questions, and I'm sure this team's going to look pretty different heading into next season because it usually does. But still, you got to like what the Blues did this season. In this second segment, we're going to be continuing to talk about the playoffs, the season, the players. It's a wrap-up episode. It's going to be all over the place, but we got a lot to talk about. That being said, Tommy, you did mention how the Colorado Avalanche are a pretty tough matchup for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I would agree. Obviously, the Lightning are still the favorite. They've won the last 2 Stanley Cups. They're looking like an absolute juggernaut. However, I think the Avs could give them a run for their money. There probably would be a pretty big underdog in that series. So if you want to put your money where your mouth is, you got to check out Bet Online. Now, our partners at Bet Online continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. Bet Online is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. So we'll be right back with this of today's episode. All right, Tommy. So, I mean, where do we go next? Do we talk about maybe some of the areas that the Blues could improve on next season? Do you want to talk about the positives heading into next season? I'll leave it up to you.
Okay, I actually have a lingering thought that's been troubling me. This weekend I was watching NHL Network, and they were talking about like the biggest questions that teams will be facing in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
And for the St. Louis Blues, they brought up Ville Husso, who is an unrestricted free agent, and whether or not the Blues would be interested in bringing him back, or if they were going to go with Jordan Binnington. And if they did bring Ville Husso back, would they entertain trade calls for Jordan Binnington in the hopes of moving him out and moving Ville Husso into the role of starter? So I'm going to throw it back to you, Josh, and say, do you think that is the biggest question for the St. Louis Blues in the offseason? And if so, what do you do in that scenario?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely a big question. The one thing that I could pretty much guarantee you is that Ville Husso and Jordan Binnington will not be the goalie tandem next year. Joel Hofer is in the process of an unbelievable run for the Thunderbirds. I think they just advanced to the conference finals, something like that. He's playing the lights out. He had a goal in the playoffs. He proved with the St. Louis Blues that he's capable of being an NHL goaltender in his limited stint earlier this season. I think it's all but guaranteed that Joel Hofer will be the backup goaltender for the St. Louis Blues this season. Who knows? Could even be a 1B type situation that the Blues like going to. The big question, obviously, like you said, comes with, okay, who's the 1A? And I think, unfortunately for like theorists, I think it's a little more simple. I think it's got to be Jordan Binnington. Jordan Binnington has the proven track record. He showed that magic in the playoffs again before getting injured, and he has that big contract. It would take a lot for Ville Husso to end up being the starter. You have to sign Ville Husso to a starter caliber contract, which he was great in the regular season, except towards the end. Do you really want to give a guy like that a starter caliber contract? Because, you could argue that if you end up trading away Binnington, you'd be making the same mistake again. So not only would you have to give that contract to Husso, then you'd have to find a trade partner for Jordan Binnington, which, like we said, probably wouldn't be the easiest thing to do. I think his playoff run, that even though it was limited, I think that ups his trade value. So it wouldn't be as impossible as I think it would have been when he was looking like barely an NHL caliber goaltender for a stretch there in the regular season. But still, I think 90 times out of 100, Jordan Binnington ends up the starter. But who knows? Maybe the in-house view of the goaltending situation is a lot different than what the Blues are letting on, and maybe they were just giving Binnington run because he was the best goalie at the time, and they wanted to increase his trade value. Maybe their long-term plans are with Ville Husso. Maybe their long-term plans are with neither. Maybe they like what they have in Joel Hofer. Goaltending is such a weird position that can variate from year to year. Jordan Binnington was practically in the ECHL and then came up and won a Stanley Cup. Who knows? Who knows where the Blues have their chips? But if I had to put money on it, I would say it would be Jordan Binnington and Joel Hofer as the 1 and 2 goalies next year.
I'm gonna agree with you 50% of the way. I think Jordan Binnington is absolutely the starter next season. You're paying the guy $6 million to go out there and give you a chance to win Stanley Cups, and he showed that in the playoffs this season against the Avs and against the Wild that he can still play lights out hockey when the lights are brightest. And that's all you really want from any goaltender, right? Like if you can do your part on the offensive side of the puck and the defensive side of the puck, and Jordan Binnington has the worst regular season of his entire life, and you make the playoffs in on a wild card stretch, and like everyone's telling you don't stand a chance, and then Jordan Binnington pitches like 16 consecutive straight shutouts, and then you win the Stanley Cup. Like that's all you need. So it's like you said, like goaltenders are weird, they're fickle, and they get hot at different stretches of the season. But if you've got a goalie that really turns it on in the playoffs, and I know the Blues had some first round exits, and one of those was in the bubble, which didn't have fans. And it's been weird with COVID, right? And I feel like the true testament that's closer to Jordan Binnington's game is what we saw this season and what we saw in 2019, as opposed to the two sandwiched in between there. That was just weird seasons in general. So I think Jordan Binnington's the lock for starter. That being said, I think Joel Hofer is still kind of young, and he's absolutely showing promise as a prospect. But the Blues, I feel like, are typically pretty careful with throwing guys in the fire, as they say. I mean, even with Perunovic and Jake Neighbors, like, those guys showed flashes that they're absolutely capable of playing at the NHL level, but they still kind of, held them back for as long as they possibly could until they burst through that wall. So I think you probably hold off on Joel Hofer a little bit until, he absolutely forces your hand and makes you call him up to the bigs. So fair. I think Chucky Sideburns as the backup next year is the move for the St. Louis Blues. Okay. And not only because of that, but I think, to your point, like, there's no way you bring back Ville Husso, sign him for like $3-4 million because you kind of, lost some money in the playoffs there. But then you don't have any cap space. I mean, we don't have cap space in general right now, but then you're really handcuffing yourself to address the real problem of this team, which is the defense. And I think that is the number one question for the Blues facing this offseason. Not only the defense and how do you fix it, but what do you do about Nick Leddy? Because he was the trade deadline acquisition that kind of came in and I wouldn't say completely turned this defense around, but this defense looked 10 times better with him in the fold. And the defensive zone exits looked 100 times better, but he is a free agent. He is getting up there in age. Is that a guy that, you want to be the highest bidder on to bring back into the fold? And, he's probably going to like the fact that you're, competing for Stanley Cups and all that stuff. But has he spent a long enough time here to value being here over just getting the most bang for his buck?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of questions that, we obviously don't have time to get into today. Fortunately, with the Blues being out, that's all I'm going to have time to talk about in the coming weeks and months and stuff. So, stay tuned. Like I said, in the following episodes to hear me cover that. That being said, though, in this upcoming third and final segment, we're going to be talking about our overall expectations for the season and whether or not the Blues surpassed them, underwhelmed our expectations. Who knows? We'll be getting into that. Make sure you stay tuned. Okay, Tommy, in this final segment of your Locked On Blues career, so it's only fitting that we encapsulate this entire season into 7 minutes of content here. In terms of your expectations, when you sat down, when you looked at this roster before opening night, we all had expectations. Obviously, it's hard to remember what those expectations were because the season has changed so much. But if you could try to put yourself in the shoes of the Thomas Welch from the beginning of the season, would you say your expectations were met? Were they blown away? Do you feel underwhelmed? Do you feel right on the mark? What are your thoughts with how this season went as a whole?
Well, I think we were both on the same page that making it out of the first round was a dub, right? So I think just in terms of that, you got to put your hands together and give some applause to not only the St. Louis Blues, but past us for being like, this is the threshold and the Blues have passed it. That being said, I think also our expectations, like we said, making it out of the first round was a dub, but expectations have to be like, a Stanley Cup contending team because of, you brought in Buchnevich, you brought in Saad, you brought in all of these guys, you had Binnington, like this team was loaded from top to bottom and we saw it.
Okay, I'm a sidebar real quick. Was this a Stanley Cup contending team?
I think so. I think
I agree.
I think Whitney on Spit and Chicklets said that the winner of this series between the Avs and the Blues would go to the Stanley Cup and potentially win it or something like that. I think he's spot on. Imagine the Blues matched up against the Edmonton Oilers. Like, no offense to the Oilers, but like if you can lock down McKinnon and Makar with the way that the Blues managed to do the entire series, except for like one game where, I don't know, McKinnon had a hat trick, or not something. Ideal, but yeah, over the course of 6 games, if that happens once, like that's huge. That's a dub for the Blues. So I feel like if you really only have to worry about, Connor McDavid, it's Connor McDavid, right? He's going to take over a game at some point. But if you can, neutralize him, if you can neutralize him, which I feel like O'Reilly would be capable of doing, and then just worry about Draisaitl, and I feel like defensively, like They've got Darnell Nurse, but really no other guys like jump off the page at you.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know. I think the Avs were a much more menacing foe than the Edmonton Oilers. So if the Blues would have made it past that, go up against the Oilers, who knows what could have happened, right? Hindsight's 2020. But at the end of the day, I think I think, yeah, you're spot on that this Blues team was absolutely capable, especially with Binnington in net, of contending for a Stanley Cup and potentially winning one.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the road to get there is never going to be easy. But that's how it works. If you're going to win a Stanley Cup, you're going to beat teams that also deserve to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, hey, quick shout out to my Boston Celtics. They beat three teams that everyone thought could win the NBA championship on their way there. So there's no shame in losing to a better contending team. So I mean, you can't be mad at that. You can't say, oh, they're not a contender. They lost in the second round. Well, yeah, they also pushed probably the second best team in the NHL to 6 games and were 5 seconds away and to bounce in overtime away from pushing them to 7 games, which, like you said, who knows what could have happened. So yeah, the chips fall differently. Maybe they don't match up with Colorado till the finals. Maybe Colorado gets bounced out by another team. The Blues absolutely find themselves in the Stanley Cup final. It just didn't happen this year. They just didn't have that little extra magic, which as a contending team, it's not going to happen every year unless you're the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I don't think you can be mad at the way that the Blues went out. Obviously, bounces go differently. They very well could have won that series, but I think that's more of a reason for optimism than pessimism, because if they find themselves that's matched up against the Colorado Avalanche in the playoffs next year, which they very well could, I think that they have a little bit better of a chance in the series now that they know what makes them tick, now that they know how to counteract the Avalanche, and the Avalanche are theoretically likely going to be getting a little bit worse. I forget who's a free agent for them if there's no way they're bringing them back, but I know that they've got a couple guys that they're not going to afford all of them. Yeah. So
that's a big one.
Again, the Blues are in a good spot. And in terms of expectations, I would say they're absolutely met and probably exceeded a little bit, at least on my end. I wanted a playoff run. We got that. We got a very exciting series against the Colorado Avalanche. The Blues had one of, if not the greatest playoff comeback I've ever seen from them in that game where they won in overtime. One of the most exciting playoff games I've ever seen. So yeah, you know what? It would have been nice to see them win a Stanley Cup, but all things considered, I'm very happy with the way that the season went. Obviously, offseason, big questions, lots of question marks. Blues aren't exactly a young team, so there's a little bit of a sense of urgency there. But that being said, they got plenty of young talent in Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, and it looks like Robert Thomas finally exercised his playoff demons there right up at the end of the series. So
they both
who
got
knows?
A lot of much needed experience too.
Yeah, exactly. It really feels like they're getting ready to hand the reins over to them as the future leaders of this team. I like the direction that this team is heading in. It's not like a situation where like you had the Blackhawks or the Red Wings a few years ago where it was like, crap, the second that this window closes, we're going to be a lottery team competing for a top 3 pick. No, even though you got old guys on this team, besides the defense, which I'm sure the Blues will figure out, the offense is in great hands. The goaltending is in great hands. This Blues team is shaping up to be one that can compete for years to come.
Yeah, and I think, so there's a couple more burning questions I think that are on a lot of Blues fans' minds, especially after that last game. So I think number one is David Perron coming back? I think the resounding answer to that is absolutely no chance. Yeah, there's no way. Like, the dude's going to retire a Blue 100%. You can't fault him if he does go out on the market and look for, like the most money and most bang for his buck. But I think you can fault Doug Armstrong if he doesn't, offer that to a guy that has not only led your team in scoring and paved the way for these young guys to learn from, but has been a vital group of your leadership core for, who knows how long, like 10 plus years, right? So I think that kind of settles that one. I think a more pressing question is on the basis of Vladimir Tarasenko, because of the trade requests and all those things, and because he was kind of silent against the Avalanche. Was that the last Blues game that we saw with Vladimir Tarasenko? And if he does leave, will that affect his legacy? And then I think a lot of people are asking questions about Colton Parayko, which are probably viable questions, just because that last game was kind of rough. I don't know if you try to move him in the offseason or trade him because, that contract is kind of big and over 8 years, like that's rough. But I think at the end of the day, like Colton Parayko is a good solid defenseman, and one bad game doesn't change that.
Yep.
But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that basis, Josh? Because something has to happen defensively. I don't know if Colton Parayko is the answer, but him being the number one guy, I think we kind of saw this season that Justin Falk more so moved into that role than Colton Parayko. But if you put Colton Parayko out there by himself, he needs somebody else to depend on and that's when he's most effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the arguments for Vladimir Tarasenko and Colton Parayko could be pretty similar when you sum them up, and it's that like I don't have a problem paying Vladimir Tarasenko $7.5 million. I don't have a problem paying Colton Parayko $5.5 million. Did both of them underwhelm that number? Probably a little bit. And the thing that it comes down to for me is, would that money be better allocated differently? You know, would I rather have 2 more depth forwards than one Vladimir Tarasenko? Would I rather have 2 more top 4 defensemen than one Colton Parayko? Obviously, you know, at that price point, you're not necessarily getting that when it comes to Parayko, but regardless, I think that money could be better allocated.
Are you talking about Matthew Tkachuk?
I wasn't, but I could be.
I know a lot of people are talking about him too. So
I think both the forward core and the defense feel like they have a little bit of fat they could shed off. And it's I would suspect it's gonna happen somehow. The Blues got 3 defensemen that they got locked up for like 6 years at about $6 million, even for all 3 of them, and Krug, Falk, and Parayko. I wouldn't be surprised to see one of those 3 not in a Blues uniform next season, and the most likely candidate would be Colton Parayko. Same thing for the forward core. It's just like you don't want to commit that much money and that much term to that many guys reaching the wrong side of 30. That's how you get in a situation like I was talking about earlier with the Chicago Blackhawks, where the second that their core, you know, took a step back, they were like one of the worst teams in the NHL. And I'm not saying it's what the Blues are due, because honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see them double down on this core, and that would concern me a little bit. But I think the smart move is to, you know, take your losses while you can and say, yeah, maybe Vladimir Tarasenko for 1 more year would be great, but what if we can bring in some 24-year-old forward, whatever. Obviously, you're going to have so much time to talk about this in the offseason. From the
Calgary Flames.
Okay, yeah, maybe. Going to have so much time to talk about this in the offseason, but I definitely think it would be smart for the Blues to allocate a little bit more towards the youth of this team, you know, and maybe that's saying goodbye to certain core members, but that's what you got to do when you're in a position like that. It's going to be a fun offseason because, like you said, like we've both been saying, they could very well keep both Colton Parayko and Vladimir Tarasenko and run it back with a pretty identical team. Or if they trade one or both of those guys, this team is going to look completely different. Honestly, I have no idea what to expect. So it's going to be fun. Any more pressing concerns, Tommy? We got
2 off the top of my dome.
Okay.
If you're looking for help in the offseason and Blues are looking at free agents, as much as Blues fans are going to hate to hear it right now, I don't think there is a player that would fit the Blues system more, especially if they end up not bringing David Perron back. I don't think there's a player that would fit the Blues system more in terms of like playing with an edge, playing with skill, and getting under players' skin more than Kadri. So I'm not saying the Blues are going to bring him in. I'm just saying he would be a perfect fit. And then also, I think the emergence of Alexei Torpachenko in this playoffs has been huge. And we gave him some respect on his last couple of games, but I think he could be just a bullet and rise up the ranks of this team extremely fast. And if that is the case, because of his similar playing style to Ivan Barbashev, I think it could potentially make Barbashev expendable.
Yep.
And after him coming off of a career year, he kind of went silent in the playoffs. You know, obviously you don't hope the guy was injured or anything, and we'll hear, more as those reports come out. And that'll probably change my thinking on this. But if he was healthy in the playoffs and went silent, and you've got Torpachenko waiting in the wings, I wouldn't be surprised to see Ivan Barbashev moved in the offseason.
Yeah. There's so many questions to answer. Can't get to all of them today, but that's why, we're going to be doing this podcast, or I'm going to be doing this podcast throughout the offseason. Going to be having all that stuff covered for you guys. That being said, though, we are getting close to the end of today's episode. So, Tommy, any closing thoughts, final words? for our listeners?
That's all I got. I just want to say thank you guys for all the memories and the questions and the listens and everything. As always, you can follow me at Twelcher15 on Twitter. Like I said, I'm not going to stop tweeting about Blues hockey or ever watching any St. Louis sports. So you can still hang out with me there. And I don't think this will be the last time I'm in front of a microphone either. So it should be a lot of fun. But
Absolutely.
I appreciate all of you guys, especially you, Josh, for, being there from day one. So much love always.
Lots of good memories. Moving on to a new chapter, like you said, but I'm sure that this won't be the last time. You got a sneaking suspicion that you'll be a semi-frequent guest as the next season approaches and stuff like that. That being said, though, thank you guys all so much for listening. As I said earlier, bear with me as we go through some changes over these next few episodes, next few weeks. Looking forward to any feedback, constructive criticism you guys may have. Leave it down in our YouTube comments. Subscribe to our YouTube at Locked On Blues. We've been growing there really, really rapidly. Love to see that. And also hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That way you never miss a new upload. Same with YouTube. You got a little notification bell in the top right corner next to the subscribe button. Hit that as well. That way, send a notification right to your phone whenever we upload.
Smoke that thing.
Smoke it.
Annihilate it.
Annihilate it. That being said, follow all of our socials, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Follow Tommy on Twitter at TWelcher15. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.